Canada's escape plan, leaving the US for the EU? Scene, dramatic visuals of Trump at a podium, announcing tariffs. Cut to worried Canadian workers and empty warehouses. What if I told you that Canada, America's closest ally, is considering breaking free from the US and turning to Europe? Scene, map of Canada, a slow zoom out showing distance from the US to the EU. Overlay bold text, Canada's economic escape plan. For decades, Canada's economic stability has been tied to its southern neighbor. But Trump's unpredictable trade policies, rising tariffs, and America First agenda have shaken that foundation. Canada's trade relations with the US are under pressure like never before. And now, an unthinkable question is being asked. Should Canada join the European Union? Chapter 1, Trump's Trade War, the Breaking Point. Scene, old footage of Trump signing tariff orders, overlay with bold text, 25% tariff on Canadian goods. It all started with a series of aggressive economic moves by the Trump administration. First, steel and aluminum tariffs. Then, threats of a 25% tariff on Canadian goods, targeting industries that fuel Canada's economic growth. Scene, headlines flash, Canada retaliates against US tariffs, trade war escalates. Narrator, Canada fought back, imposing countermeasures on US exports. Kentucky bourbon, Florida orange juice, nothing was off limits. But with Canada exporting 75% of its goods to the US, was this a battle it could afford to fight? Chapter 2, Canada looks east, the EU alternative. Scene, Parliament Hill in Ottawa, cut to Canadian officials meeting EU diplomats. Then came the pivot. With Canada's economic strategy in jeopardy, policymakers turned their eyes toward Europe. The Canada-EU Trade Agreement, CETA, had already removed most tariffs, creating a clear path for expanded economic ties. Scene, a side-by-side map of US and EU trade numbers with Canada. Europe's economy is more than twice the size of the US, and Canada's trade opportunities with the EU are growing. But then, an idea emerged, one that was once considered absurd. What if Canada joined the European Union? Chapter 3, Could Canada join the EU? Scene, The Economist article headline, Canada and the EU? A dream or a possibility? While geographically distant, Canada shares deep historical ties and economic partnerships with Europe. The EU does not strictly define what a European country is, meaning Canada could theoretically apply. Scene, Timeline of EU accession requirements, comparing Canada's regulations. Narrator, the hurdles are significant. Canada would need to align with 35 chapters of EU law, but here's the catch, Canada already meets most of these requirements. Regulatory frameworks, democratic values, economic standards, Canada is more compatible with the EU than many current members. Scene, news clips of European officials commenting on Canada's role. And some European leaders are open to it. The sentiment? If the UK can leave, why can't Canada join? Chapter 4, The Challenges of Leaving the US. Scene, Canadian and American flags waving side by side, then slowly fading apart. But there's one problem, Canada's economic dependence on the US is massive. Trade between Canada and the US is valued at over $700 billion annually. Canada's economic realignment with the EU could take decades. Canada's trade relations with the US are deeply rooted in energy, manufacturing, and supply chains that can't be severed overnight. Scene, poll results show most Canadians oppose closer US ties, but aren't sure about the EU. Then there's national identity. Trump once joked about making Canada the 51st state, but history has proven that Canadians reject US integration. Is Canada's economic independence worth the risk of alienating its biggest trading partner? Chapter 5, Canada at a Crossroads. Scene, Prime Minister Trudeau walking out of a press conference, with March 9th looming. Canada's political landscape is shifting. Trudeau's departure means Canada's trade strategy could change overnight. The Conservative Party is projected to win the next election, and their stance on Canada's trade alliances could reshape the country's future. Scene, graphics of Canada's economic future, one path leading to the EU, one staying with the US. Canada now faces a defining moment in history. Does it deepen its reliance on the US, or does it forge stronger economic partnerships with Europe? The clock is ticking, and the world is watching. Final chapter, the big question. Scene, dramatic montage, Trump, EU leaders, Canadian businesses closing, and poll results flashing on screen. This isn't just a trade war. It's a battle for Canada's economic independence. Scene, fast cuts of pro-EU protests, Canadian factories shutting down, and European diplomats shaking hands with Canadian officials. Is this Canada's best chance to break free from US economic control? Or is Canada's trade relations with the US too vital to risk? Scene, final frame, a split screen of the Canadian flag, with the EU on one side and the US on the other. Comment below, should Canada move toward the EU or stay loyal to the US? Let's hear your thoughts. Call to action, keep the viral momentum. Subscribe for more deep dives into global politics and economy. Share this video if you think Canada should take a stand. Turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. Scene, dramatic fade to black, lingering background music intensifies, leaving viewers wanting more. Big Dave, say to hell with dictators and wannabe tyrants. If we reach out, it should be to the UK first, because when imperialists last came for us, they stood with Canada, unwavering. Now, disinformation has poisoned minds so deeply that 10% of Canadians think we'd be better off in the US. What? The F***? The same US that taxes our resources, undermines our industries, and treats our sovereignty like an afterthought? If Canada were ever under attack, the first to fall would be the traitors within, 1,000 swords of justice ensuring it. We are Canadian. We will never kneel.